Welcome, everyone. Thank you for joining us. I'm Matt Little, and I'll be your host for today. I'm the Program Content Manager at CFLI, and today is our first of a series of webinars we will be conducting with our course leaders at the City Football Leadership Institute. This session will focus on tackling new markets, which is essential for the growth of sporting organisations and businesses. This area is highly topical in sport, as organisations look to generate greater and more diverse revenue streams, with prominent organisations looking to grow on a global scale. We're joined today by Dr. Nick Wilde. Nick has a PhD in sports consumer behaviour, a master's degree in marketing, and substantial industry experience in marketing and advertising across both business and sports industries, locally and abroad. Thanks for joining us, Nick.
Thanks, Matt. Thanks for having me. Good afternoon, everybody.
Before we begin, if anyone would like to ask Nick a question, please pop this in the Q&A box in the toolbar at the bottom of the screen, and we'll try and answer as many of these as we can at the end of the session. Okay, might just jump straight in. Over the past few years, we've seen several sports and clubs look to expand their operations both locally and internationally with varying success. Why is it vital for organisations to understand the environment they're trying to enter?
So I think the thing to really point out here is that we're talking about sport, but organisations have been tackling overseas markets for 900 years in many cases. So it's just an essential part of business that you understand the environment that you're going into. So you're going into for what in most cases is a completely new market, and so you need to know what it's like to be there on a day-to-day basis, what the business culture is, how do people do business, what kind of setup is there in the organisation, what the market is itself. I mean, even in a sporting market, there are different sports. So football might not be the main sport, cricket might be the main sport in one country, or basketball. So really, you can't operate in an overseas market without a real understanding of how people do business there. Yeah, I suppose we'll touch on that again a bit later on, but it goes down to, it's all about culture, and some of the work from the sort of 80s and 90s of Kenichi Omai, as he talked about insiderization. Said that culture really is everything in business. You've got to be seen by the people in the host country as being local and close to them. So getting close and getting as close as possible, and gives you a much better understanding of the market.
Yeah, I mean, you touched on quite a few things that we'll tap into in a bit more detail throughout this webinar. But I guess, that market research element being so crucial to the organisations entering, new markets. What key factors should they consider before deciding to try and have a crack at new markets?
Well, I think the first thing is that we have to talk about filtering the market. So if you don't have a particular choice of market to go into, maybe you're thinking of 5 or 6 different markets, then you need to ask some key questions specifically around sport. But then the first question would be, what's the legal framework in that country? Can we buy into that country? Can we be a participant? Can we buy a share of a club? Can we register a company inside that country? So that's really important as a first step. And what the market research does is its main function is really to reduce risk when you're making decisions, because you're talking about making a purchase or investing in an organisation that might be costing you several £1 million. So we invest in market research to try and reduce that risk and to try and give us a better understanding. So the market research is in sports, when we're noticing in the sports business and sports industry, that they're increasingly more people who are specializing in this area. So things like Football Benchmark look at this. So it's, you know, there's lots of research out there. Usually you would, so having decided which countries you can go into, and let's face it, there's some that you politically you might not consider going into because of the instability in the country, but then at the same time, there are some that just might not fit in with what we want to be involved in as an organization. So yeah, that's the key area to focus on. I think then once we've established that there might be an opportunity to work in that market, then we have to establish on what basis that is. The key really is about being represented in that country. So representation starts at the lowest level. So the lowest level could be we just appoint somebody to represent us in that market. Let's throw in a market like South Africa. So we appoint somebody to work on our behalf who's on the market, in that market, working for us. The sort of next phase then might be actually to have our own person there, in the market. Again, simply that could just be meeting people, representing us. You could then consider having an office there. Again, being that physical presence, being the insider. To then that could be the pathway to then potentially looking at partnerships, learning more about the market. And then we sort of looking at joint ventures, entering into partnerships. And then probably the most expensive would be where we're going for majority ownership over 50%. So this is an area. So this would be an area to focus on.
Great. I mean, there's so many key elements there in terms of the research and obviously building that understanding of the market that you're trying to enter. And I suppose once that research has been conducted and the decision has been made to enter a new market, whether that be, all those different things that you spoke about, how do organizations start to adapt their brand strategies and messaging to resonate with the diverse audiences that exist within that region?
Yeah, so prior to that, we just sort of talk about sort of cultural understanding. Is that once we're inside the market, we get a much better understanding of it, particularly in this case, sporting culture. What's acceptable in that market and what isn't. And I go back to sort of my experience as a sort of a 19-year-old spending a year in Mexico and seeing that the sporting culture was completely different to Europe. But at the same time, it was closely aligned. They had their own identity, but it was closely aligned to American sports. So Mexicans had their own passion for their own football teams, but at the same time, they would also follow a baseball or an American football team or a basketball team. But once we're inside the market, I think then it makes it easier to adapt. And in some cases, we may have to change. We may have to look to work with an existing brand, or even to change the brand. Have a different brand in our portfolio. So we're not necessarily talking about going to the market with our brand, but we go in with a brand or a brand name that may be more suitable and more acceptable in that market. There's things that we have to consider, just like the acceptance of colors in markets. Our color may have different connotations in a market. If you look at some of the African countries, you notice that green is a significant color. So something as simple as that, something as simple as your color, the brand color, that may be something that we have to adapt. And then I think as well is that what's really interesting is looking at the sort of background in sport and the number of young people. I think the demographics of a country, and in particular focusing on age, that in our own country we may be targeting predominantly 18 to 24-year-olds, but in another market it may be that there's more interest in our sport from a 30 plus or a 40 to 55. So in that case we would certainly have a different approach. I think also what I'm noticing is really interesting is the the impact of technology as well, and sort of platforms that are available, and the companies that are offering up services. So in that case, we may have to adapt to a different social media platform, different levels of technology. So these are just some of the areas where we need to adapt.
Yeah, I mean, you spoke about some of the cultural considerations. How difficult is that for organizations to get right? Because it does seem like a very complex opportunity, I suppose, when you're moving into a new market. It must be really difficult for organizations to get that aspect right.
Yeah, that's I think it's probably the key to all of this. Once we've decided to go into a market, culture is everything. Culture is everything about about the country. I mean, always you could say, if you focus, what's the important thing here? It's like it's culture, culture, and culture. So, when you go to another country, you just will notice slight differences. It might be differences in the way that people dress. It might be differences in the way that what they drive, how they set up the things that they value. And it's very difficult for somebody from another culture to have an understanding or an appreciation of another culture. So this is sometimes where, we're talking about partnerships, that we try and work with people who are from that cultural background, so that they have that understanding. There's some great there are some great stories of where companies have made horrendous mistakes just by choosing a brand name that was okay in their own language but was offensive in another language. So you can't really. I think it's very, very difficult to understand the culture without spending time or having somebody introduce you to it. So I think that the way to bypass the cultural problems is to work alongside people with that culture. And given that there are so many, particularly now, I've been involved in consultants in education for a long time, and there are lots of people out there who have they're educated in Australia. They go to Australia, United States, the UK. They're doing sports management degrees and sports marketing degrees, and then they're going back to their country. So there are lots of people to represent you and to give you this sort of cultural understanding. So we just can't underestimate it. And it's what makes us all different, isn't it? Even down to, I mean, one of the considerations, and I think this is what suits multi-club ownership or competing on the markets, is that just something as simple as the weather, the time zones and the weather. So, we're freezing cold here I'm sitting in London, and it's freezing cold. But in Africa, there's countries and it's 35 degrees. In Australia, it's 35 degrees. So, just understanding the impact that weather plays on culture, and how people live. So yeah, I mean, I think if you're going to be seriously about this country, you need to immerse yourself in that culture. So you need to go out there, or you need to have people from your organization out there. But the fast track for me is to work alongside people who have the understanding of the language, and the understanding of the culture. I mean, it's quite a few clubs have done this in the past, where they've had foreign players and they've brought in people who are sort of bilingual in their market to help them acclimatize. So yeah, so really, culture is everything. And the sort of simple way one of my mentors always said is that there are, I don't know, some like 75 to 100 definitions of culture. But the best thing, the way to remember this, I think, is he to say culture is it's the way we do things around here. That's the main difference.
Yeah, thanks, Nick. Just a reminder, if you would like to ask Nick a question, please pop that in the Q&A function in the toolbar at the bottom. I mean, you've touched on this quite a few times, that need for partnerships and relationships in those areas that you are trying to establish. yourself and your brand. And I guess, we're seeing it more and more. Sporting organizations aligning themselves with other sports groups in different, regions globally. Now, how important are those strategic partnerships and collaborations in tackling new markets?
Incredibly important. I think going back to the idea of being, I think the main focus is being close to the market for if you're going to be successful in that market. So if you partner with people who are in that market, you're fast tracking that. So and also you're tapping into their knowledge and expertise, and in particular their network. So the hardest things when you're setting up a business, you've got to focus on marketing, you've got to focus on finance, you've got to focus on operations. So if you're going to do that yourself, you're going to have to bring in people. They're going to have to learn more about the culture there. But if you work with an organization, let's say an existing sports club, let's say like the one in Mumbai, this is fast tracked, isn't it? The Indian culture, a very, very rich culture, business culture, very, very complex. I think it would be, companies have found it very difficult to be involved in the Indian market in any industry, not just in sport, without having the partnership there. So it's almost a must. It gets you there quicker, but also means that you can take a bit of a back seat at times. You're likely to be more accepted. You're not going to make the mistakes of an inexperienced organization. And you allow these people who are your partners, who have an interest and a stake in the business. You allow them to help you understand their market, but at the same time, you can bring your expertise on sports marketing and sports finance and fan engagement. So I think these partnerships work really well, and I think, in my opinion, that's probably if you're going into a market in a serious way, I think that really is the option. Because in many cases, legislation says that you can't have a majority stake in a lot of businesses, and whether it's sport or major brands. So really, then sometimes it's your only option. I think as well is that interesting with you've taken a lot of interest in sports finances, I think, as we all are, and that sort of partnership allows you to test the water, doesn't it? You don't have to go full in and buy 50, 60, 70% of an organization. You could go in with a 10% stake. You can work on that stake, you can work on that relationship, build that up, and then increase your stake. And so I think that I think that identifying partners is key. That's why we have representation in different markets. Now we have trade representations to help us find the best partners. But I mean, in this case, if you were looking, say, to invest in a rugby club, you may have 10 different options in a particular market. So just that initial understanding of the market will help you to make the right decisions. So again, there've been some companies that made some horrendous mistakes in overseas markets, and I think you have to be really careful that you don't go into a market and upset. I mean, without sort of naming names, you think about just something as simple as the company that bought Hull City and wanted to change the name because it suited their culture, but it didn't really suit the culture of the host club. So and we're looking at someone like Germany as well at the moment. This is politically very difficult in terms of sporting politics. It would be very difficult to enter. So to be seen as a majority partner, I think that's going to be very difficult to get inside a country.
Yeah, I mean, I've just seen one of the questions come through on the Q&A before we jump to maybe a slightly different topic. But I mean, I suppose there's always this perception that, moving into, say, China or India is always the best method because you only need such a small percentage of the population to be in your corner. And how difficult is it to move into those regions? I mean, with some of the things you've unpacked here,
Yeah,
and what are, I suppose, some of the learnings of the organisations that have tried.
yeah. I think if you take China for example, it's still they, they have they have their own. It's a word called guanxi, and it means connection. What it really means is that without connections in those markets, you can't operate. If you don't work with the right people, you don't know the right people, you don't know the key people inside an organization. So it comes back to probably stakeholder mapping here, doesn't it? If you don't know who these people are, you can't possibly hope to get your business done. And so yeah, so not trying to go into these markets without local representation is very, very difficult. I mean, if you do go in without that understanding, I can give you an example of it's surprising it's 20 years old, but Sheffield United partnered with a Chinese club very, very early on, a long time before anybody was doing it. And it was great, £400,000 to buy, I think it was £400,000 to buy 40% of a club in a province with 100 million people surrounding it in the Chengdu Blades. And everything was great. Sending, players were going over to China, coaches were going over. The Chinese team came to the UK. They played, Sheffield United played the Sheffield United, the Chengdu Blades, they were called. And everything was great. But then the club was involved in a betting scandal, and the whole thing collapsed. All that money went. It just wasn't worth anything. So that was an early mistake that was made. But there will be many others. Given some time, we're looking at some of the investment coming into the UK at the moment. It's great. It's great to see that there's so much interest in the market. But you wonder, potentially, are some of these bad decisions? Are some of these will these prove to be decisions made based on the desire to be involved with one of the biggest leagues in the world, but that without a real understanding of the culture, some people may fail. Yeah, may find that it's very difficult to bring a sporting culture from another country and for it to be successful here. So there are so many. We could spend the next 2 days talking about failures of businesses in overseas markets.
I mean, in terms of, you've touched on a few of the things that are unique, I suppose, to sport. What are the differences, the key differences that you see between businesses looking to expand their markets globally and obviously sport that are doing it, more regularly now than maybe previously?
Yeah, I think the difference with sport and other brands, I suppose, is the outcome of the game. It's the thing that you can't control. So you can have an event. I mean, some of these, let's face it, some of these events, they're wonderful, aren't they? Big games, big attendance, big TV or global TV audiences, wonderful stuff. But what you can't control is the outcome. And if it's a boring game, or the worst case situation is in some countries, your team is relegated. Somebody drops out of the Premier League. So I look at some of the work of Kieran Maguire. Some of the Deloitte reports. You can lose £1 million, £100 million of the turnover just by dropping out of the Premier League. So that by any stretch of the imagination, that makes sport very different, doesn't it? That there are these sorts of penalties that of not being involved in the top flight. I think also with sporting culture and fandom as well varies from country to country. I mean, there are obviously some similarities. I think I was just reading that it's something like 80% of young, particularly 80% of people that watch football also, and probably this is probably for all sport, they also have their phone with them all the time. They're using their phone all the time. They're playing football. So that may vary in countries. You know, is there such a thing as youth culture? Do 18 to 24-year-olds behave the same in the UK as they do in Australia and Canada and China and France? That's again, that can vary as considerably. So again, you know, there's even down to behavior inside the stadium that can be different, can be quite challenging at times as well to the behavior of fans. You know, if you're looking at South America, you know, it's just some great markets there, but there's a sort of there are problems there with violence at games and some of the games, so that doesn't make for a sort of a great viewing, or for it doesn't promote it as a sort of as a family friendly sport.
Yeah, I mean, sport is never a straightforward path on the field, and it's certainly not off the pitch. But how should organisations measure success when they're tackling a new market? Is there a time frame around this? Is it, you know, all revenue based? You know, how should they measure their success?
Yeah, I think it depends on, first of all, it's what they want to get out of it. So, you know, probably let's take a sort of lower level partnership in a country with a small stake. Your objective there would be to, you know, become established in the market. You probably don't, like any sort of business venture, there may be a period of time when you have to invest to sort of, you know, cover some costs for a couple of years. But then the success could be in terms of increasing the, you know, again, I look at something like that. There's some fabulous platforms out there that clubs are buying now, and so one would be to focus on the business side. You know, have you increased ticket sales? Have you increased partnerships? What improvements have you made in the academy and the training structure? You know, how are the results on the pitch? How are we doing in terms of fan engagement? How are we doing in terms of, you know, social media? How are we increasing that? We're getting good content out there. So there's a range of different areas, but again, you may have relatively low expectations in the first year or two, just to become established in that market. So yes, I think again, it's across the playing performance. Obviously, is very important. It's not something that we can control, but we can invest heavily in coaching and the analytics, you know, and the software that goes with that. And at the same time, I think fan engagement is really the key here, isn't it? You know, not just the so if we look at, say, with you know, the Manchester City and some of the partnerships, while you go into a market, you work with a club, but then there is also the likelihood that the people in that country, let's say India, will then, although their first team might be Mumbai, they will associate more closely with Manchester City because they see them as a partner club. So yes, so I think fan engagement is a huge area where clubs have to invest, and I think you sort of, if you're not a big social media player, you know, even as a small club, if you're not heavily engaged in this, I don't think you're really communicating with the fans of the future.
Yeah, I mean, look, there's so much to unpack in this topic, and thanks so much for covering off on some of that through the content you shared today. We do have some questions from the audience, and please feel free to populate a couple extra questions if you have one handy. question that we semi touched on before when we're talking about moving into the India or Chinese market, but what emerging markets is Citi more interested to invest in? Is India's a sleeping giant with 1.4 billion population in terms of development of football?
Sorry, so that's a question specifically about India, yeah?
Yeah.
Yeah, I think one of the things that I learned very early on is that when we say India, yeah, but what you have to understand is that a country the size of India or China or even the United States is that it's almost it's more than one country, isn't it? It's a number of mini countries inside one, and so you would have to be if you don't have resources, if you've got limited resources, you would have to tackle probably one city. So you couldn't target the whole country. You know, you would have to say, right, where's the best region? Where does my sport fit in? So there will definitely be some regional differences. So your research on that market would have to be, focused on those areas. I don't claim to be an expert on India, although I've got a lot of students there. I know a lot about the sport there, but I don't think. I think there are pockets of that country where there's more interest in cricket, and in other some of the, I think cricket is still the main sports, but hockey again is big in certain areas, and then you've got sort of like different sort of regions and ethnic groups. So yeah, I think researching that market is key, and identifying a really strong player. So yeah, I think is it Mumbai is from what I read about Mumbai, it's the almost a fashionable place, isn't it? It seems to attract a lot of interest, but I I would imagine that Mumbai is very different, say, to Delhi. So yeah, so my to tackle a market like that is, you definitely need to be working with local people and local partners. So well again, we're not necessarily party to this. Yeah, I think it would have to be some kind of partnership, making some making connections with people over there. Quite a bit of research, I think, because it is a complex market.
Another question: which global brands, either within sport or not, do you feel have been the most innovative in growing their brand and entering a new market?
I mean, historically, I think brands like Gillette, they're very strong brands. There's a wonderful map, if you get a chance. There's a wonderful map of the brands around the world, and I think in sort of fast moving consumer goods, particularly in sort of the food part of that, I think it's about 5 companies that own the majority of the brands. So what you see as a brand, that may be part of a portfolio of 200 or 300 brands. And again, when you look at the success is where it's where the idea is, again, going back to Kenichi Ohmae, is to think globally but act locally. So you are a global brand, and that brand will be recognized by local consumers, but you just may need to adapt it slightly so that it fits into that market. So you look at the sort of Gillette brands, some of the cosmetics brands. So there are lots of very successful brands, but I think I've always been interested in Gillette and how they've adapted to different markets, and by having this global presence. I think it's another reason really for going into more than one market, because you're spreading the risk, aren't you, to a certain extent, and you're increasing the opportunity to make more money, to increase your revenue in these markets. So yeah, so some brands. I mean, if you look at some of the Chinese brands as well that are pretty good. They're sort of making their way in the market. So I, my I think sort of a personal favorite would be the Gillette brand. Um, yeah, just through again through partnerships, through identifying regions as well. You know, do you target a region, and fast moving consumer goods companies will pick an area to manufacture and maybe serve 10 or 15 different countries just from that manufacturing facility. I don't know
The
if that does
question,
that. Yeah.
yeah, no, that's great. Thanks for that. What markets should we expect to impact the industry most in the next 5 to 10 years?
The sports industry. Wow, I think looking at the expectation. I think it was PricewaterhouseCoopers saying is that we're looking at growth of about 6% globally in the sports market. So assuming that's most of the big markets, I would think the US market is very interesting as a market, although complex. I think really Africa is untapped, isn't it? I think that there's lots of work to be done in with African clubs and Africans, clubs in Africa. I don't know. South Africa was one that we were just looking at with on statistic. Something like the value of or the book value of a club in South Africa ranges from 3 million euros to only 30 million euros. So, that looks like a future market. Certainly India and China because they're growing. So yeah, I think a lot of people now are looking towards Africa to see what kind of partnerships they can forge.
I think we've got time for maybe one final question, but how important is it that organisations engage with their fans, particularly in moments of failure?
Yeah, I think it's vitally important, and I think there's no excuse not to engage with it because you've got never before we've had access to our fans in the same way, have we? You can connect with them instantly. So I think it's really important. I think if we underestimate the power of our fans, then we're in big trouble. And I think also um, it's not just our domestic fans, but it's our fans around the world, isn't it? Once you commit to being a global brand, and was looking at this the other day. So something like Real Madrid it's like 150, 160 million followers on social media. So, that's not just your fans in Spain; that's your fans all around the world. So I think it's really important. And again, it's part of something that should be built into a plan. I think we do some courses on crisis management, don't we? But that's if you lose the support of your fans, you're in big trouble. So yes, I think it's really important to engage and to explain a situation and put the club's put the club's point of view forward. You can do it instantly, can't you? You can send a message out in the next 5 minutes to however many people are on your database or how many people follow you on social media.
There's one more question I've just rolled down through the questions, and I think this is a good one. What could some easy wins for sports organisation clubs on a limited marketing advertising budget to start to grow into emerging markets?
Yes, that's a great question. I think really that what we see is that I've noticed this a lot with students, that there are opportunities there's a lot of talented young people out there who really understand social media. It's sort of, this is not for my generation. Social media fascinates me. I think it's great, but for a young generation, there are lots of opportunities here to start to create content and create a much better relationship. Quite a number of clubs now, and we're not talking about spending hundreds of thousands of pounds here. We're talking about taking on somebody to create some content to put out there. And I know that quite a number of clubs have been doing that in the last 2 or 3 years, just having somebody permanently with a camera inside the organization who works within the team and goes and captures content and looks for interesting stories. And again, is brave enough to target, to target, to come up with something creative just to catch people's attention. And so you can help build up the following for your club and interest in your club just through great content. And again, it's let's say a small. I think probably the best example there was for me was Stevenage, where we did that with their CEO, that they invested quite heavily in social media. They got involved in esports and just created a following. I think the other thing is that the big push now is on player trading. So clubs have to consider, developing players, bringing them in, and selling them on. So that's something that a smaller club can concentrate on and start thinking about, how they scout their players and how they use them into, how they develop them as players. So yeah, these are some of the areas that I would focus on.
Well, thanks very much, Nick. Really appreciate your time today. I think there's some really valuable insights into entering new markets. For those that are interested in gaining a bit more information about entering new markets, they can take our masterclass on growing a global brand. This will commence on Friday, the 15th of March, with Nick as our course leader. We'll also have contributions to this masterclass from Chris Moriarty, the head of personalized marketing, and Paul Handler, the head of social media and international content at Manchester City. Many of those topics will be discussed, that were discussed today, will be explored in more detail. If you'd like to join us for the masterclass, you can register via our website. This will be placed in the chat. I think it may have already been popped in there. We also have a career booster initiative available for participants between the ages of 18 and 25. So if you're in that age bracket, please check that out. In future weeks, we'll be conducting webinars on storytelling in sport with David Ford, which will take place on Wednesday, the 6th of March. Then in 2 weeks' time, we'll have another session on acquiring and managing talent in football with John D'Souza. This will take place on the 19th of March. Further information on how you can join this webinar will be provided later today. So please keep a lookout for that information. Thank you very much for your attendance. Thanks again, Nick. It was really great to get your insights in this area. And thanks everyone else for joining.
Cheers, Matt. Thank you. Good luck, everybody.